people think. Most power is something you take. They think it lives in loud voices, in raised fists, in the person who dominates every room they enter. They are wrong. Power does not live in force. Power lives in stillness. And the most dangerous person in any room is never the one who is the loudest. It is the one who feels everything and shows nothing. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this 500 years ago. And in 500 years, not a single thing about human nature has changed. The man who cannot control his emotions cannot control his life. And the man who cannot control his life will always be controlled by someone else. This is not philosophy. This is law. You have been leaking power your entire life. And you never even saw it happening. Every time someone insulted you, and you fired back immediately, you lost something. Not the argument. Something more valuable than the argument. You lost the perception of your own invulnerability. You showed the room, and yourself, that you can be reached, that you can be moved, that the right words, delivered with enough precision, will produce a visible reaction from you. Every time someone ignored you, and you chased them, you lost. You communicated, without a single word, that their attention is worth more to you than your own dignity. That you will cross the distance they created, rather than let the distance teach them something about your worth. Every time anxiety pushed you into an unnecessary explanation, you lost. No one asked you to justify yourself, but you did anyway, because the silence felt like accusation, because the uncertainty felt unbearable, because some trained, conditioned part of you believed that explanation equals safety. It does not. Explanation is vulnerability, and vulnerability offered to the wrong people at the wrong time, without their having earned it, is not courage. It is exposure. Every time anger made you speak before you thought you lost, the words came out before strategy could shape them, before wisdom could edit them, before the part of you that understands consequence could review them. They came out hot and unfiltered and honest in all the wrong ways. And the person who provoked you got exactly what they came for. Not because the other person was stronger, not because they were smarter, not because fate was working against you, but because your emotions moved faster than your mind. And in that gap, that dangerous, decisive, invisible gap between feeling and thinking, your power escaped. Silently, constantly, without you ever noticing the bleeding. The world around you was watching. It always is. It was learning. It was cataloging every trigger, every reaction, every nerve that could be pressed to produce a predictable, readable, manageable response from you. And once the world knows how to move you, it owns you. This is not dramatic language. This is the operating reality of every social interaction you have ever had. People are reading you, constantly, not always consciously, not always with malicious intent, but the reading never stops. The question is not whether you are being read. The question is what they find when they read you. Do they find a person who can be provoked into reaction? A person who can be drawn out with the right pressure? A person whose emotional interior is legible, predictable, and therefore manageable? Or do they find something they cannot fully decode? A stillness that communicates depth they cannot measure? A composure that suggests there is more happening beneath the surface than they will ever be permitted to see? The answer to that question determines your position in every room you enter for the rest of your life. And the answer begins not with what you do, it begins with what you stop doing. It begins the moment you decide truly, deeply, irreversibly decide that your emotions are yours. Not reactions waiting to be triggered, not performances waiting for an audience, not weapons being handed to anyone who knows where to aim. Yours. Under your authority. Subject to your discipline. That decision is where everything changes. Niccolo Machiavelli watched kings fall. Not to armies, not to conspiracies, not to superior forces that overwhelmed them on the battlefield. To themselves. He watched brilliant rulers lose entire empires because they could not manage a single moment of pride. Because one insult, delivered to the wrong person at the wrong time, cracked the composure they needed to maintain. Because fear made them act before strategy could speak. Because desire pulled them into decisions that emotion chose and reason never approved. He sat in the courts of Renaissance Italy with the cold, surgical patience of a man who had decided to understand power at its deepest level. Not how it should work. Not how philosophers wished it worked. How it actually worked. In real rooms, between real people, with real consequences. And what he saw was consistent across every court, every kingdom, every ruler he observed. The ones who held power longest were not the most intelligent. They were not the most charismatic. They were not the ones who inspired the greatest love or commanded the greatest armies. They were the most controlled. Not controlled in the sense of restricted, not controlled in the sense of suppressed, controlled in the sense of deliberate, in the sense of chosen, in the sense of someone who has such complete ownership of their interior world that their exterior world reflects only what they intend it to reflect. And he watched lesser men, men of ordinary intelligence, men who had inherited rather than seized their positions, men who lacked the natural gifts of the brilliant rulers who had already fallen hold power for decades, simply because they had mastered the one discipline that separated the ruler from the ruled. They did not react. They responded, slowly, deliberately, after calculation, after the emotion had been received, acknowledged, and consciously set aside, so that strategy could operate without interference. Machiavelli observed that the princes who fell were not the unintelligent ones. That is the myth that flatters the fallen, the idea that they were simply outmaneuvered by someone smarter. But Machiavelli saw the truth. They fell because their emotions moved faster than their strategy, because pride would not let them absorb an insult without reacting, because fear would not let them wait when action felt urgent, because desire would not let them delay when gratification was immediately available. They fell because they had never learned the pause. That fraction of a second, that space between stimulus and response, that territory invisible and decisive and completely under your authority where the choice lives. The choice to react or to remain still. The choice to speak or to let silence work. The choice to advance or to withdraw. The choice to give them what they came for or to deny it so completely that they begin to question whether they misread the situation entirely. That pause, that infinitesimal, life-altering pause, that is where all power lies. And Machiavelli documented, across decades of observation, the consistent and irrefutable truth that the man who masters the pause masters the room, masters the relationship, masters the negotiation, masters the conflict, masters, ultimately, his own life, in a way that the reactive man never will. Consider what actually happens inside the mind of another person when you do not react. They delivered the provocation. They calibrated it carefully, whether consciously or instinctively, to produce a specific response from you. They expected the response. They were prepared for it. In some fundamental way, they needed it because the response was confirmation that they had power over you, that they could reach you, that they mattered to you in the way that only someone who can be hurt by another person matters. And instead, they received nothing. Not coldness, not hostility, not the brittle, obvious performance of someone trying very hard to appear unbothered while being deeply bothered. Genuine stillness, the composure of someone who received the provocation, processed it, and categorized it as beneath their reaction, all without the slightest visible disturbance. What happens in their mind in that moment is not nothing. It is the opposite of nothing. It is a question. Why did that not land? And once that question enters their mind, everything shifts. Because now they are the uncertain one. Now they are the one searching for information. Now they are the one who needs to understand what just happened, why it did not work, what it means about them that it did not work. You have, without a single word, reversed the entire architecture of the interaction. They came to destabilize you. They left destabilized themselves. This is not strategy in the manipulative sense. This is the natural, inevitable consequence of genuine emotional mastery. When you are genuinely unmoved, people feel it. They cannot explain it. They cannot name it. But they feel it in the way that you feel. The difference in a room when someone truly powerful enters it. There is a gravity to composure that cannot be faked and cannot be resisted. Here is what no one tells you about your emotions. They are not your enemy. They are not the problem. They are not the obstacle. They are not the weakness that needs to be excised before you can become powerful. They are information. Anger is information. It tells you that a boundary has been crossed, that something you value is being threatened, that a situation demands your attention and possibly your action. Fear is information. It tells you that you are approaching the edge of your comfort zone, that risk is present, that the stakes are real. Anxiety is information. It tells you that uncertainty is high, that the outcome matters to you, that your nervous system is preparing resources for a challenge. Jealousy is information. It tells you what you want, what you value, what you believe you are not currently receiving or deserving. None of these are enemies. None of them need to be destroyed. All of them are attempting to serve you. The problem is not the emotion. The problem is the automatic, unexamined conversion of emotion into action. The untrained person is a passenger in their own life. Emotion gets behind the wheel and drives, into arguments that accomplish nothing, into reactions that reveal everything, into decisions that feel urgent in the moment and catastrophic in the morning, into words that cannot be unsaid, into bridges that cannot be unburned, into moments that cannot be retrieved. The trained person is different in one fundamental way. They feel the same things. The anger arrives. The fear arrives. The anxiety and the jealousy and the desire and the pride all arrive, exactly as they do for everyone else. The emotional experience is not diminished by mastery. If anything, it deepens because you are no longer running from it, no longer suppressing it, no longer pretending it does not exist. You feel everything, and then you pause. And in that pause, you make a choice. Not the choice that the emotion demands. Not the choice that would relieve the immediate pressure of the feeling. The choice that serves your intention. The choice that moves you toward the outcome you have decided on. The choice that the version of you operating at your highest capacity would make, not the version reacting from your most primitive conditioning. Feel everything, express strategically. This is the entire discipline in 4 words. Feel everything, because suppression is not mastery. Suppression is simply a different kind of loss of control. The person who suppresses their emotions does not master them. They bury them, where they accumulate pressure and eventually erupt at the worst possible moment in the worst possible way. Express strategically, because expression is a choice. What you reveal, when you reveal it, to whom you reveal it, and in what form you reveal it. These are all decisions that belong to you. They are not automatic. They are not obligations. They are not the honest, authentic response that you owe to everyone who manages to provoke a feeling in you. They are choices. And like all choices, they have consequences. The person who expresses strategically does not lie, does not perform, does not pretend to feel things they do not feel or claim not to feel things they do. They simply decide what the moment requires. And they give exactly that. No more. This is the difference between a man who is powerful and a man who merely performs power. And the difference, once you have seen it, cannot be unseen. Performance can be broken. Discipline cannot. The performer is always one good provocation away from exposure, because the performance is a layer over the unmastered interior, and layers can be stripped away. The right pressure, applied to the right place, at the right moment, will find the gap between the performance and the reality beneath it. But the disciplined person has no gap to exploit. The composure is not a layer over something volatile. It is the genuine exterior expression of a genuinely mastered interior. There is nothing beneath it that contradicts it. There is no gap between how they appear and what they are. And that seamless, unassailable integration of interior mastery and exterior composure is what the world instinctively recognizes as power. Not performance, not the appearance of power. Power itself. Consider what happens when you stop reacting. Someone provokes you. In the old version of yourself, you react. Immediately, automatically, without the pause. You defend, you explain, you counterattack. You prove, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the provocation landed, which is the only proof the provocateur ever needed, the only proof they were seeking. They wanted to know if they could reach you. Your reaction answered the question, definitively, loudly, in a way that they will remember and use again. In the new version, you pause, you absorb, you let the provocation arrive, register it fully, and then consciously decide what it deserves. Often, the answer is nothing. Not because you are suppressing your response, not because you are performing indifference, but because, upon genuine reflection, the provocation is not worthy of your energy, not worthy of the words it would take to address it, not worthy of the attention it would consume to engage with it. And so you let it pass. You look at the person with the calm expression of someone who has already assessed the situation and found it beneath their full attention. Not with contempt, not with superiority, simply with the quiet, settled composure of someone who has other things to think about that matter more. And then you move on, without the backward glance, without the lingering energy of having been affected, without carrying it into the next moment. And something in that movement, that easy, unbothered continuation of your direction, communicates something to everyone present that no argument could have communicated. You cannot be destabilized. This is not a claim you make. It is a demonstration, and demonstrations are worth 1,000 claims. They came to find your nerve and discovered it has been relocated somewhere they cannot reach. They came to produce a reaction and discovered that you have become genuinely, thoroughly unreactive to this particular frequency of provocation. And that discovery, that quiet, unsettling, recalibrating discovery, changes how they see you. Not temporarily, permanently, because you have now answered a fundamental question about yourself in their mind. The question they were, consciously or not, trying to answer with the provocation. The question of whether you can be controlled, of whether the right pressure, applied in the right way, will produce the response they need. The answer they received was no, and a no that is demonstrated rather than declared has a permanence that words can never achieve. Because people respect what they cannot fully predict, people are careful around what they cannot fully calculate. People assign weight and authority and genuine consideration to the person whose interior they cannot access, whose reactions they cannot reliably anticipate, whose position in the hierarchy they cannot comfortably dismiss. Your composure is not politeness. It is not warmth. It is not social lubrication. It is not the performance of a person who is trying to make others comfortable. It is armor. The most powerful armor ever constructed, because it cannot be taken from you by any external force. It can only be surrendered from within. It can only be abandoned by you in moments of inattention or insufficient discipline, when the emotion moves faster than the pause and the reaction escapes before the choice can be made. The armor is yours. Do not surrender it. The practical reality of this is not complicated, but it is demanding, because it requires something that the entire architecture of modern life is designed to prevent: a pause. We live in an age of immediacy. Instant communication, instant response, instant validation. The infrastructure of modern existence has been built around the elimination of waiting, around the expectation that every stimulus will produce an immediate response, that every message will be answered the moment it is received, that every question will be addressed before the discomfort of its unanswered state has time to settle. And that infrastructure has done something to us, something subtle and pervasive and deeply damaging to the capacity for mastery. It has trained us to believe that the pause is a failure, that silence is absence, that non-reaction is non-engagement, that the person who does not immediately respond is either incapable or indifferent. None of this is true. The pause is where choice lives. Silence is a statement. Non-reaction is often the most powerful reaction available. And the person who does not immediately respond is frequently the person who is operating at the highest level because they have refused to let the pace of the interaction be dictated by someone else's urgency. You will be provoked today. Perhaps you already have been. You will feel the pull of reaction, immediate, familiar, oddly comforting in its automaticity. You will encounter the person, the message, the situation that is specifically calibrated, whether by design or by accident, to draw you out of your stillness and into visible, readable, manageable emotion. In that moment, you have one job: pause. Not for long. A breath, a beat, the smallest possible unit of deliberate space between the stimulus and the response. In that pause, one question. A single question that cuts through all the noise of the immediate emotional experience and brings you back to what actually matters. Does my reaction serve me, or does it serve them? If the honest answer is that your reaction serves them, that it gives them the confirmation of your emotional availability they were seeking, that it hands them information about your interior they have not earned, that it costs you composure and gives them power, then withhold it. Not forever, not as punishment, not as a performance of invulnerability, as a strategic decision, as the considered choice of someone who understands that their emotional energy is a finite, valuable, irreplaceable resource, and who has decided not to spend it on people and moments that have not demonstrated they deserve it. If the honest answer is that your reaction serves you, that it advances your position, that it communicates something useful, that it is the right response for the right moment, then respond. But from choice, not compulsion. From intention, not instinct. From the version of you that operates with full awareness of the consequences, not the version that is simply relieving pressure. This is the practice. Not a single transformation, not a dramatic moment of change after which everything is different, not the acquisition of a technique that you apply mechanically to every situation. A practice, daily, imperfect, cumulative, 10,000 small pauses, 10,000 deliberate choices, 10,000 moments where the provocation arrived and you chose, consciously and deliberately, what to give it. Some of those moments you will get wrong. The emotion will move faster than the pause. The reaction will escape before the choice can be made. The words will come out before strategy could shape them. These are not failures. They are the data of the practice. They tell you where the conditioning is strongest, where the patterns are most entrenched, where the work is most needed, where to return tomorrow with renewed attention and renewed discipline. Because this is not about perfection, this is about direction. The person who pauses 7 times out of 10 has more power than the person who never pauses. The person who pauses 8 times out of 10 has more power still. And so it compounds, incrementally, across the days and weeks and months of genuine practice, until the pause is no longer an effort but a reflex. Until the space between stimulus and response is no longer something you create with difficulty, but something that exists naturally, automatically, as the default operating mode of a person who has internalized the discipline completely. And those 10,000 moments compound. They accumulate. They build layer by layer, choice by choice, day by day, a person who moves through the world differently. A person who enters rooms and shifts the atmosphere, not because they demand attention, but because their stillness commands it. Not because they are performing authority, but because they radiate it. Not because they announce their power, but because their power is visible in the way they carry themselves, in the way they hold their composure, in the way they absorb pressure without bending. Now you need to understand what is happening in the minds of the people around you. When you change, when you stop being the person who always reacts, who always responds immediately, who is always emotionally available and emotionally legible, something happens in the minds of the people who knew the old version of you. Something they will not admit to, something they may not even consciously recognize. Discomfort. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine. At its deepest biological level, it is designed to detect consistency in the environment and depend upon it. Consistency means safety. Consistency means predictability. Consistency means the world is operating as expected, and no additional resources need to be allocated to understanding it. When consistency breaks, when a pattern that has been reliable suddenly changes, the mind registers the change as significant. It allocates attention. It searches for explanation. It enters a state of mild alert that does not resolve until the new pattern is understood. You have been consistent for years, always available, always reactive, always emotionally legible, always producing the expected response to the expected provocation. And now you are not. The change registers. Even if they cannot name it, even if they would not describe it as discomfort, even if they would insist, if asked, that they have not noticed anything different. They have noticed. They notice in the way that you notice when a room you know well has been rearranged. You cannot immediately identify what has changed, but something feels different. Something requires more attention than it used to. Something is no longer exactly where you expected it to be. That sensation, that subtle, persistent, unresolved search for explanation, is the beginning of a different kind of attention to you. They begin to think about you more. Not because they have decided to think about you more, because the question of what has changed has entered their mind and refuses to leave without an answer. Why are they different now? What has shifted? What does it mean? And in the searching for that answer, without finding it, something begins to grow. Respect. Not the respect that comes from accomplishment, not the respect that comes from status or wealth or the external markers of success. The primal, instinctive respect that comes from encountering something you cannot fully understand, something you cannot fully predict, something that does not behave the way everything else behaves. The respect that Machiavelli observed in the courts of the powerful, directed not at the most accomplished or the most celebrated, but at the most controlled, the most composed, the most genuinely unmoved by the pressures that moved everyone else. That respect is beginning to build around you. In the minds of people who have not yet found words for what they are feeling, in the interactions that are beginning, subtly and unmistakably, to carry a different quality, in the way they speak to you and about you and think of you when you are not present. You are becoming someone different, not just in their eyes, in yours. There are people who will resist this transformation, not consciously, necessarily, not with malice, but resistance will come, because the change in you creates a change in the dynamic, and not everyone benefits from the new dynamic the way they benefited from the old one. Know them, not as enemies to be defeated, as patterns to be recognized. The first pattern is the provocateur. This person has built their relationship with you consciously or unconsciously on your reactivity. They have learned, through accumulated experience, that they can produce a specific response from you with specific inputs. An insult, delivered with enough precision, a challenge, aimed at the right vulnerability, a cutting observation, timed to land when your defenses are lowest. And they have used this knowledge, perhaps not viciously, perhaps not even with full awareness of what they were doing, but the pattern was established. They provoke, you react. And in that pattern, they held power. Because the person who can move you holds something over you that the person who cannot move you will never have. When you stop reacting, the pattern breaks. And the breaking of the pattern will initially produce escalation. Because the provocateur's first response to the failure of their strategy is not to abandon the strategy, it is to intensify it, to apply more pressure, to search for the version of the provocation that still works. Hold the stillness. The escalation is confirmation, not crisis. It is the evidence that the change in you has registered, that the pattern has genuinely broken, that they are now the uncertain one, searching for an approach that works, while you remain settled and unmoved, and absolutely clear about what you will and will not give them. Hold the stillness through the escalation, because after the escalation comes one of two things. Either they retreat because the dynamic that sustained their approach has been dismantled and there is nothing left to operate on, or they adjust because some part of them recognizes, perhaps with reluctant admiration, that the person before them is no longer the person they learned to navigate, and that the new person requires a different approach, a more respectful one. Either outcome serves you. Do not react. Do not explain. Do not defend. Witness the provocation with the stillness of someone who has already assessed it and found it beneath their reaction. Move forward without the backward glance. The second pattern is the energy drainer. This person is less malicious than the provocateur, but equally significant in their impact on your resources. They are the individual whose every interaction requires a full expenditure of your emotional energy without any meaningful return. The constant conversation that circles back to the same problems. The perpetual need that is never satisfied because it is not seeking solutions, it is seeking your attention, and your attention is what feeds it. The endless loop of crisis and drama and emotional urgency that always requires your engagement, your response, your energy. You know who they are. You have always known. Because you leave every interaction with them feeling depleted in a way that has nothing to do with time spent or effort expended. That feeling is not weakness. It is not excessive sensitivity. It is information. It is your internal system recognizing that an exchange has occurred, your presence, your engagement, your emotional resources, given freely in the expectation of mutual value, and that the exchange was not balanced, that you gave something real and received nothing back, that replenished it. Strategic withdrawal from the energy drainer is not cruelty. It is not abandonment. It is not indifference to genuine need. It is the responsible stewardship of the resource that powers everything else in your life. Your attention, your emotional energy, your presence. These are finite. They cannot be infinitely spent without consequence. And the consequence of spending them on interactions that drain without replenishing is the gradual, quiet diminishment of the capacity that everything else depends on. Protect the resource, not selfishly, strategically, with full awareness of what it is worth and what it enables. The third pattern is the guilt architect. This is perhaps the most dangerous pattern of all, because it operates not through force or manipulation, but through the most powerful levers of your conditioning: guilt, obligation, and the fear of being perceived as cold. When you begin to withdraw, when you become less available, less reactive, less consistently present in the ways that others have come to depend on, the guilt architect will name the change. They will describe it in the most unflattering terms available. They will call it abandonment, selfishness, a character failure, evidence that something has gone wrong with you rather than evidence that something has gone right. They will say, "You have changed. You used to be different. I do not know who you are anymore." And the part of you that was trained across decades to need approval, to measure your worth by the reactions of others, to feel unsafe when someone who matters to you is displeased, will feel the pull of that accusation, will want to retreat to the old behavior, will want to restore the comfort of the old dynamic, even though the old dynamic cost you everything it claimed to give you. Understand this with absolute clarity. The guilt architect is not wrong that you have changed. You have changed. That is the entire point. They are wrong about what the change means. They are interpreting your growth as a loss to them. And they are not entirely mistaken, because the version of you that was always available, always reactive, always emotionally accessible to whoever claimed your attention was convenient for them, was easy, was something they did not have to earn because you gave it freely. The new version requires something different from them, requires more, requires genuine reciprocity and genuine respect, and genuine earned access to what you now understand to be your most valuable resource. And that requirement feels, to the guilt architect, like rejection. It is not rejection, it is the establishment of a standard that the right people will meet. That the people who genuinely value you, who are genuinely invested in something real rather than in the convenience of your availability, will rise to meet. Hold the standard. The fourth pattern is the casual dismisser. This person will respond to your transformation with performed indifference, with the casually delivered observation that you have become unavailable, less engaged, harder to reach, expressed in a tone that suggests they could not care less about the change. Do not be deceived. The person who genuinely does not care does not comment. The genuinely indifferent do not take the time to observe indifference aloud. The truly unbothered do not need to perform their unbothered state for an audience. The casual dismissal is almost always the loudest available signal that the change has registered, that it mattered. That the person delivering the dismissal has noticed your absence and is managing the discomfort of having noticed by performing not noticing. Let it pass without response. Your silence in return is its own communication. Your continued direction forward, unbothered, clear about where you are going, is the only response that serves you. You are not responsible for their discomfort with your transformation. You are responsible only for the ongoing stewardship of your own authority. Your emotions will resist this transformation, not because they are weak, because they are powerful. Because they are the accumulated product of decades of conditioning, of social training, of reward systems, of the 10,000 moments in which engagement earned approval, and approval felt like safety. The conditioning runs deep, deeper, perhaps, than you currently understand. It will assert itself at the worst possible moments, when the stakes are highest, when the provocation is most precisely aimed, when the person delivering the challenge knows exactly which nerve to find, because they have found it before. The resistance is not failure. The resistance is the weight of everything you are lifting. And lifting weight builds strength. Begin each day with a single intention, one strategic silence, one moment where you would ordinarily speak, react, explain, accommodate, and you choose instead to hold your position, to let the moment pass, to observe rather than participate. It will feel wrong at first. It will feel like the silence is costing you something. Like the unreacted to provocation is a debt that will come due. Like the unexplained absence is creating a problem that will need to be solved later. It is not. The silence is not costing you. It is paying you. Compound interest, accumulating across every moment of successful restraint. Practice composure in low-stakes situations first. In the small moments, the minor irritations, the trivial provocations that are not worth the energy they would consume. Let those pass. Let the silence hold. Train the pause in territory where the consequences of failing it are small. Because the pause, like any skill, develops through repetition. Through the accumulation of small successes that build the neural architecture of the response until it is no longer effortful. Until it is no longer something you create with deliberate attention, but something that happens automatically as the default expression of who you have become. And who you are becoming is someone the world will need to recalibrate to. Someone who moves through rooms differently, not loudly, not dramatically, not with the performance of authority that announces itself before it has earned the right to speak. Quietly, deliberately, with the settled, unhurried composure of someone who knows exactly what they are, exactly what they are worth, and exactly what they will and will not give to any given moment. The room feels it before it can name it. The people in the room feel it before they can explain it. Something has shifted. Something about the person before them is not what it was, not what they expected, not what they can fully calculate. And in the inability to fully calculate you, something rises in them. Attention, consideration, the recalibration that produces, over time and through accumulation, the thing that cannot be demanded or performed or purchased. Respect. Machiavelli's final lesson was never written down. It was lived. By every person throughout history who understood, at a level deeper than philosophy and more durable than theory, that the ultimate battlefield is not external. It is the 6 inches between stimulus and response. Win there, and you win everywhere. in the negotiation, in the conflict, in the relationship, in the room, in the long, accumulating contest of every human life. Lose there, and it does not matter what you win anywhere else, because the person who cannot govern themselves will always, eventually, be governed by someone who can. Control your emotions, not as suppression, not as performance, not as the brittle, effortful maintenance of a surface that does not reflect what is beneath. As mastery, as the genuine, practiced, compounding discipline of a person who has decided that their interior world belongs to them, that their reactions are their choices, that their emotional energy is their resource to deploy as they determine, in service of their intentions, toward the outcomes they have decided on. And watch with the quiet certainty of someone who understands exactly what they are doing and exactly why it works, how the world around you begins to shift. How the people who once knew exactly how to reach you discover that the map they had no longer corresponds to the territory. How the ones who underestimated you begin, quietly and without announcement, to reassess. How the rooms you enter begin to feel different when you are in them, not because you are performing anything, not because you are announcing anything, but because genuine mastery radiates in a way that cannot be manufactured and cannot be ignored. How the people who matter begin to treat you the way that people who have earned their own power treat each other, with consideration, with weight, with the recognition that the person before them is not someone who can be moved by ordinary pressure, manipulated by ordinary levers, controlled by the ordinary mechanisms that work on ordinary people. Because the person who cannot be emotionally manipulated cannot be controlled. And the person who cannot be controlled in any room, in any relationship, in any negotiation, in any moment of conflict or pressure or deliberate provocation, is always, quietly, undeniably, the most powerful person present. You are no longer the person you were when you began reading this, because understanding, when it is genuine, is irreversible. You have received something tonight that cannot be taken back. Not a technique, not a tactic, not a temporary advantage that will fade when the situation changes. A principle. Ancient and durable and true in every era and every context and every room that has ever contained human beings negotiating for position and power and respect. The principle that your emotions are yours, that your reactions are choices, that your composure is armor that cannot be stripped by any external force. That the pause, that small, decisive, powerful pause between what you feel and what you do, is the territory of your authority, the place where your power actually lives. From this moment forward, you are in control, not of the world, not of other people, not of the outcomes that fate and circumstance and the choices of others will continue to shape, of yourself, and that singular, foundational, irreducible control is the source of every other power you will ever hold. Master yourself first. Everything else follows. If you understand this, comment, "I am in control." Subscribe for more lessons in power, psychology, and mastery.